So, a prior request, I think that came in about 2 weeks ago, was for me to do a video of the music that I enjoyed, my favorite kind of music. Now, um, I'm going to try and be as, how do I say this? Detailed but quick, because otherwise, as you can see, we've got, I think I counted 27 tabs. Um, as I was preparing for this, I realized that my musical tastes were a lot more varied than I'd originally thought. Mainly because a lot of what you're going to see, I haven't listened to in quite some time. In fact, as I was building this, I even added some of my old CDs back onto Spotify. So, so yeah. So the very first, so this is going to be sort of a this is going to be sort of a look at the kind of music I like, how I came into that music, that sort of thing. So we're going to start with Enya. I've got all of her albums, and the way that what I love about her is that she's just so gentle and calming. This is the kind of music that I will listen to almost all the time now, especially because of my studies, which can be very stressful at times. Um, the way I came into her music was actually rather interesting. I was browsing around an electronics store one day, and then I heard the opening title to this album, "A Day Without Rain," the opening track, excuse me, that was under the same title as the album. And I asked an associate what's playing in the stereo. She told me. I made a note, and as soon as my allowance got up high enough, I went ahead and bought the album, and the rest is history. The only one of her albums that I've had the most difficulty with getting on streaming media is Paint the Sky with Stars. And even on Spotify, you can get Paint the Sky with Stars except for track 12, which happens to be Paint the Sky with Stars. I don't know why that is. I don't know how that had happened. Um, if I could locate the CD, because it's somewhere. If I could locate the CD, I'd be happy to upload that to one of the streaming services, whether it be Google or Spotify or whoever will allow me to do that. Um, I don't understand why that's happening. I mean, obviously it's the publisher, right? But at the same time, it's kind of meh. I don't know. I blame the streaming media giants for that one, and I don't know. But anyway, I absolutely love her music. I've got her latest album, Dark Sky Island. Um, and in case you're wondering, have I listened to her before? Some of her more recognizable songs are Orinoco Flow, that has a repeated verse of "Sail away, sail away, sail away," um, and also "Only Time." If you were around during the September 11th attacks, as I remember I was in my high school math class. Shortly after those attacks, Only Time played on the radio almost nonstop. And that song was so appropriate for those times and for any time, to be honest, because it goes a little something like this. Who can say where the road goes, where the day flows? Only time. And for anybody who's curious, I had a video up a couple months ago of me singing a cover for Enya's "Song of the Sandman." Um, and in case anybody who commented on that video is wondering, yes, I'm still very serious about one of these days getting singing lessons and improving my singing ability. It's something I really want to do. Um, and any singing that I do in this video is only for example. It's only to show. It's only to show that perhaps you may have heard a song before, but you just didn't recognize it, or you may have heard an artist before, but you just didn't recognize it. So anyway, Enya's "Only Time" became one of the most popular songs of the early 21st century because of those attacks. It really lent itself to calming people in those tough times, and it's true. I mean, only time can tell. what happens from day to day or even minute to minute. Um, but her music is just, it's very soothing, very calming. It just gets me through the day whenever I need to pick me up. It's just fantastic. Yanni, Yanni is an interesting artist. He is a self-taught pianist and keyboardist. He primarily works with synthesizers, and I've got this album here, The Very Best of Yanni. I haven't listened to too much of his stuff since about 2003 or 2004. I came in during his instrumental period, and when he started adding lyrics, I guess I kind of fell out. And I think the reason is because I'm all for adding lyrics to music, but if you've grown up with an artist doing one particular type of music and then they do something, or you've gotten into an artist that does a particular type of music, and then all of a sudden they shift, um, I mean, you know, you may like it, you may not, but it's definitely takes some getting used to. But what I love is his very new age style. His one of his more gentle pieces is called "In the Morning Light." I also like "The Mermaid." He has also got the opening track to this album is called "Aria," and that is a vocal track, but it's an opera, and I genuinely love operas. Um, I went to see Carmen a couple years ago, and I just had a grand time. They had subtitles at the top of the stage where when the singers were singing in Italian, they had the English subtitles at the top so we could follow along, and it was a really wonderful, just a wonderful story. You know, in terms of how it was done, the performers, etc. But no, Yanni is like I said, just a very he's to me he sets sort of a trance, sort of like an outworldly kind of thing. I don't really know how to describe it, and because the most of the music that I listen to of his is instrumental, you'll just have to if you do a search for Santorini or The Mermaid or Through the Looking Glass, you'll have a better idea of what I'm on about. 2002, they are an instrumental group, or an instrumental husband and wife, actually, duet. They primarily do new age kind of music. New age is my most, out of all the genres, new age is my most listened to. And the title for this track, called The Ocean Dreams, actually led me to start writing a story about a mermaid that I never finished. The way I got into this particular album, well, I'll just mention real quick, Yanni. How I got into Yanni was because of an old friend I was talking to way back in the days of AOL Instant Messenger, way before Facebook. Unfortunately, that friend had basically kind of disappeared. You know how people kind of like they close accounts and they, you know, if you don't talk to somebody for a long time, they may end up disappearing on you and you don't realize it. Well, that's basically what happened with this person. So with 2002, I was walking through with my uncle at the Inner Harbor. We were browsing the Barnes and Noble over near that area, and I saw this album and I listened to it. This was back in the days before we had streaming music, before we had Spotify, Amazon Prime, Apple Music, that sort of thing. So what you would do if you wanted to listen to something, you would either go to a website, or if you were in the store as I was, you would see this kiosk. And this kiosk, you could scan an album and they would play the first, 20, 30 seconds of a track. Barnes & Noble used to have these devices as well. And it was a great way of previewing an album before buying. So I previewed this album and I said yes. And I've got quite a few albums by 2002 now. I've got this one. I've got, let's see, Summer of 300 Years. I've got River of Stars. I've got, oh shoot, what was it? Sacred Well, The Emerald Way. Just a whole bunch of really great, very, very relaxing kind of. This is the sort of music that you would have on in the background while you're studying. Similarly, with Medwin Goodall, The Dolphin Quest. Basically, the same way I got into this as I got into the Ocean of Dreams album, Across an Ocean of Dreams album. Excuse me. I listened to it online, and I was like, I headed into Barnes and Noble with my mother at the time. I was a freshman in high school, I believe. And my taste in music is not. Most people don't listen to. Now, I'm not saying that nobody listens to. I mean, like, there are millions of people that listen to this. But in terms of being like on the top charts, number one, especially these days, I've not really noticed. Not so much. As a result, the music that I like to listen to, particularly this album especially, was not readily available. And so I have them order it. It took them about a month to get it. And they screwed up my phone number, so when I came in to check and see if it was available, they were just a few days from sending it back to the supplier. So I lucked out there. But this is just what this is. Medwin Goodall will take ambience from locations. So, for instance, there's an album of his called Kilimanjaro, and he actually took winds that are supposed to be, I guess they're supposed to be winds from Kilimanjaro, and layered the music on top of that. Same with the Dolphin Quest. The first track, Divine Connections Part 1, will open with waters and actual recordings of dolphins swimming around, and then the music begins. And that's basically the whole album. It just goes through as one continuous serene experience with the dolphins. It's just really fantastic. It's something that I think you should definitely give a chance if you're into that sort of thing. Similarly, there's Kamal. He's another new age artist. Reiki Whale Song. And Reiki, for those of you who do not know, is an ancient healing art from, I believe, Japan. So you will hear, if you want to give this music a shot, you may hear a chime or a little bell towards the end. That basically indicates the end of the healing session. An ex of mine got me into Reiki a little bit, and I found it very interesting, very calming. The music is just this album is just fantastic for, much like the others, ambience. I would, back when I started my yoga practice, before I even took a class, I found this 8-minute practice with a couple of twists on YouTube. And after I've memorized those, I would put this album on, specifically track number 2, Song of the Deep. And you can listen to that here on YouTube. You can Google that, Song of the Deep by Kamal. And I would practice my sequence, my vinyasa, with this music in the background. And it's just very, very calming. I've sometimes used it to sleep at night. I'll sometimes listen to it on the bus if we've got people who, through no fault of their own, may have some behavior problems and maybe like screaming like little kids. Again, no fault of their own. It's a factor. It's part of their circumstance. But me personally, it reminds me too much of my middle school years, which were years that I'd rather forget under some circumstances. Some circumstances were good, but if I'm ever reminded that, this is the sort of music I would put on. And much like the Dolphin Quest, this album again takes, in this case, recordings of whales and ocean ambience and layers the music on top of that, along with a vocalist that is doing whale calls, speaking to the dolphins. So it's very soothing, very gentle. I just love. This is the you're probably noticing a theme here. A lot of the music that I like to listen to for the most part is very gentle, very calming. And that's because depending on what happens in the world, I can get stressed fairly easily. I these days I try not to let it affect me. But if it does, I just put this on and I just escape from the world, you know. A couple of years after I started my yoga practice, I got into this particular artist. His name is Krishna Das, and this track here, Mountain Hare Krishna, um, is what um, is what my yoga teacher would play a lot of times during our practice. Again, if you search for Mountain Hare Krishna by Krishna Das, you'll be able to listen to that. It's I don't really know how to describe that. It definitely seals you away into your practice. It really helps you to block out the world, as it were. So I've got this album. I've got a couple of others that I can't remember the name of. And I say that because sometimes his album names are either repeats of very similar album names, or they may be using Indian names that might be a little bit obscure if you're not familiar with Sanskrit. So, similarly, there's Reiki River by Neil. This is in this case you hear the ambience of a river along with a Native American flute in the music, and it's very soothing, very calming. I've also got another album of his called I think it's Song of the Shaman or something. If you search for The Calling, that's one of the tracks on that album, you'll be able to get a better idea of what I'm talking about. And for this particular album, I just did a search on Amazon Music and found this, listened to it, added it, and to this day, I just really enjoy it. Inner Peace, similar story to 2002. The artist here is Stephen Halpern. His music's actually been used in therapy and massage. So he uses very low frequency synthesizers along with various instruments, from other synths to oboe to basically create excuse me, to create, as the title would suggest, a feeling of inner peace and calm. And before anybody asks, nope, that's not all I'm into. This just happens to be what I happen to listen to the most these days. But I was searching in Barnes & Noble. My uncle was with me at the time. And I picked up this album on CD, and I played it for him, and he seemed to enjoy it. I remember my mother being a bit worried because my grandmother was a devout Baptist, and she wasn't necessarily familiar with this kind of music, and my mother, I think, was worried that she might not like it. Markame, if you search for a song called Yeku, Y-E-K-U, you'll be able to listen to her. She's got a very similar approach to Enya in the way her music sounds. An old friend of mine found this searching, introduced me to it, and I have this song in my library to this day. In fact, I think maybe multiple libraries. LeAnn Rimes. The song How Do I Live was played a lot in high school. This song, along with a few others that you will see in a moment, have a very deep connection for me. Without getting into the details, I was with somebody off and on for 15 years. We met when I was I think it was between my freshman and sophomore year in high school. I'll never forget the day that we actually got to talk because I wasn't expecting it at all. She sat next to me on the bus. This was during summer camp, a day camp that we went to for the school district. On the way home that day, because we did end up on the same bus, I said to her, "Are you trying to ask me out?" She said, "Duh, why do you think I'm sitting here?" She had a real beautiful singing voice. She had a lot of potential. She also had some problems, and I won't go into detail of what those are, but I was not made aware of them at first. So I spent about the first 6 years of knowing her thinking that she was far more, shall we say, emotionally grounded than she was. Until I had a talk with her mother, who couldn't stand me, and I never could figure out why. After talking to her, I found out that there were a lot of things that I'd not been told. And thankfully, the mom continued to be civil to me after that day, but things really went downhill from there. And her beautiful singing voice, this lady's beautiful singing voice, was ruined through smoking. At least I think it was, because she stopped for a while, then she started back up. And the last time I talked to her was over a year ago. And I'd really rather not get into it. It was really rough. How does LeAnn Rimes fit into all of this, you're wondering? Well, I'm about to tell you. The song How Do I Live? She performed that a lot. She performed that at this lady, this woman I was with, performed that a lot. It was directed towards me. She was, to this day, it still reminds me of her. I think of what she could have been, what we could have been. At the same time, I'm reminded of how clingy she was about the fact that there was a 2-year absence when we didn't talk, and how there was one time she called me at midnight the night before an exam and woke up my dad. The rest of this, I'd really rather not get into unless you're willing to talk to me privately, because it's not... Nowadays, I can listen to it without breaking into a million pieces. Listen to the song without breaking into a million pieces, but this song will always remind me of her. I do wonder what happened to her. Same deal with Richard Marx, Right Here Waiting for You. Same woman. They played this a lot on the radio when I was in high school. We went to different high schools. Because of the friction between myself and her mother, and in some ways herself and myself, because there were times when she would call literally half a dozen times in 30 minutes. This song would play and I would immediately break into tears because it reminded me of her in so many ways. Now, there are a couple of people that are watching that are probably wondering what the heck I'm on about. In case anybody's wondering, I have not talked to this person in over a year and a half, and I suspect they are probably in a mental institution. That's how bad things were. But this song, I cannot listen to it without breaking into a million pieces, even to this day. It reminds me way too much of them. How I got into this? Well, it just ended up playing on the radio, and things went on from there. Charlie Rich. My mother found an album by him, and I listened to it all throughout middle school. I remember in my middle school science class, I brought the album in because I was with my mobility teacher at the time, and she also liked Charlie Rich. But I brought the album in and played it for the class. Now, keep in mind, I was a student at the time. I didn't know about the whole business of approving before, and I was actually teacher for a day. This was back in the days when they did that sort of thing. And I wasn't aware of the whole you got to approve your media before playing it in class. I don't think my teacher was either, because we only played the first track and he had me eject the album. But I remember one of my friends back in middle school said that, not many people like this stuff. And it makes sense. I mean, this was back in the 70s. Music was popular back in the 70s, and I grew up in the 90s. But I grew up with this kind of music, and I love Charlie Rich. He's just a fabulous artist. Same with Vanessa Williams. Her song "Save the Best for Last," along with her take on "Paint with All the Colors of the Wind" from Pocahontas. Those two were played a lot while I was in high school. Listening to this song brings back a lot of memories from my freshman year in high school, and also the summer day camp that we had. And I remember we listened to this song on the way to, I think it was on the way to a massage therapist. We were looking at career opportunities. Excuse me. And that was when I had my first massage, and I'll never forget that. I almost fell asleep. But I haven't had a massage in over 15 years now. I really should see about getting another one done. But no. So Vanessa Williams, this artist was played a lot back on the radio in my day, and the song kind of stuck in my head. And it's a beautiful song. If you have the chance to search for it on YouTube. My late uncle was very religious. He liked the Oak Ridge Boys, and I grew up listening to them because of him. Working on a Building, Show Me the Way to Go, I Know What Lies Ahead. Those are the three songs primarily that I grew up with. Now, I personally am not religious, but I still listen to this music to this day because my uncle died in 2006 because of double pneumonia and brain death. And it's I just this music always reminds me of him. He was just very gentle. He always had a smile. He was just a wonderful person. And so to this day, I'll listen to this music to remind me of him. This goes for also my late grandmother, who was a devout Baptist, pretty much to the letter. Now, as I told you, I myself am not religious because as I went through my college years and got exposed to more points of view, I began to question everything. And to this day, I still question everything. It's why I'm trying to get my doctorate. So there's the Oak Ridge Boys, the Cathedrals. My grandmother in particular loved this group. They are a gospel quartet. J.D. Sumner and the Stamps. Now, J.D. Sumner and the Stamps, J.D. Sumner in particular, he was a gentle giant. I have a video that has a sort of a look at his life. And I'll never forget this one story. They were in a diner, and the couple and the people next to them never left a tip for the waitress, right? Well, this waitress also did the table that the Stamps happened to be eating at. They were having breakfast, preparing for a show, whatever. And he put down $100 cash for a tip. And one of his fellow group members asked, "Well, why'd you do that?" And JD said, "Well, you put down $100 too." And soon everybody in the group had about that amount on the table. And the waitress broke down into tears. She said, "I'm dying of cancer. I'm trying to save as much money for my kids." At that moment, JD got every single cent out of his wallet, dropped the whole business, about $1,000 out of his own wallet, onto the table. Later, somebody else who knew him, a close friend of his, asked him, "How much did you give him?" And JD's answer was, "Doesn't matter. I won't miss it." That story has always stuck with me. He, in case you're wondering, is a bass singer. Uh, like I said, he did Southern Gospel with the Stamps Quartet. They also sang backup for Elvis, believe it or not. You'll notice here Elvis Gospel Favorites. He was very close to Elvis. And in fact, he performed at Elvis's funeral. Which, incidentally, I do enjoy listening to Elvis. I didn't include him in the album art covers for this video because, to be honest, if I had gone over every single thing that I have in my album, this video, which is probably already 20 minutes, would end up being an hour. But he was a bass singer. He sang a double low C, which was in the Guinness Book of World Records as having the lowest note ever recorded by a vocalist. But I love this music. Again, I'm not religious by any means, but it does remind me of my late uncle and my late grandmother. I grew up with Johnny Cash. My mother would listen to this giant hits tape of his and would have it on repeat in the car. And I got all those songs stuck in my head. "Don't Take Your Guns to Town," "I Walk the Line," "Ring of Fire," "Sunday Morning Coming Down." I just loved Johnny Cash. In fact, I've got the movie "I Walk the Line." I've also got in recent years I've also been introduced to other songs of his. Ballad of Ira Hayes, and also I believe this one's called, and I never can get the title of this one right. I believe it's called "The One on the Right is on the Left" or something like that. That is such a funny song. It's about this folk group, and it's a song about this folk group, and every single member of this folk group in this song have differing political views, and that ends up doing them in. But it's just a funny song. And in a way, to an extent, it reminds me of doctoral research because everybody has their own viewpoints, their own. It's like one of my instructors said this past semester: there are no answers, there are only arguments and a good defense. So everybody has their differing viewpoint, and that can clash. And that's why it's important to defend the argument. And I won't sugarcoat it. I'm still having trouble grasping. I get the concept. I know what I'm supposed to do. But actually doing it, whole other deal. But if you listen to this song, "The One on the Right is on the Left," or whatever that's called, and you think about how doctoral research works, it's kind of funny. It reminds me very much of going through my doctorate. But no, Johnny Cash, I grew up with him. I grew up with, well, I was going to say Tennessee Ernie Ford, but I think he's gone now. Let me see, what's the next tab? Yep. Tennessee Ernie Ford, and he did 16 Tons. If you search for 16 Tons, he did a rendition of Ballad of Davy Crockett, Shotgun Boogie, Roving Gambler. I grew up with that music too. I just love Tennessee Ernie Ford. I also grew up with Irish ballads. Now, in recent years, I've come to enjoy the Dubliners and the Irish Rovers. Songs like "Whiskey in the Jar," "Bold O'Donoghue," "The Irish Rover," "Skibbereen," and other songs similar to that. The album that I got introduced to all of these songs on, though, was a Various Artists album, and to this day, I cannot find it on streaming media. And unfortunately, one of the songs on that disc is scratched. So, I love classical music. I remember back in junior high school, my mother got me this album, Classical Shores, and it's a piano album. And they have recordings of waves hitting the shore as the music plays, and there's stuff by Debussy and Beethoven. For releases, to be honest, all I remember on that album, because that's what I listen to the most. I just wish this particular album was available on streaming media. I can't find it. And I can't find the CD either. I've got about 6 shelves of CDs, and some of them are buried. Yeah, I'm horrible at I'm horrible at trying to keep things organized when it comes to my music. But no, I just love classical music because it brings it gives you a window on how things used to be. It's one of the reasons I also love history. Classical music for relaxation. And a relative of mine got me this album like I'd say almost 20 years ago. And I played this for a very long time. I still have it. It's got Pachelbel's Canon. That's the only album that's the only thing I remember. Well, let's take a look here because we've got some tracks here. We got Pachelbel's Canon, Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker Ballet Suite, Dvorak Symphony No. 9, and Symphony No. 40 from Handel's Messiah. There was also a waltz on here that I can't exactly remember the name of or the composer. I keep wanting to say the Flower Waltz, but I'm not sure that's correct. But no, I love this kind of gentle classical music. I also like the more upbeat classical music, but I don't necessarily listen to it very often. I also enjoy flute music. James Galloway, I have an album by his called Meditations, and the opening track, Adagio, is very dark. And in case anybody out there is listening to this and I'm screwing up any pronunciations, particularly of these classical pieces, please bear with me. It is 1:30 in the morning and I am not awake. But I did want to get this album up before I forgot. This video up before I forgot. See, my brain is just bleh. Oh, and how I got into this was my mom got me a copy of this, I think for Christmas or my birthday one year. I also enjoy original soundtracks. One of my favorites is from The Lion King. And I also, because of this album, I also got into Elton John. But I love this. I just love this album, particularly "Be Prepared" and "This Land." Those are two of my favorite tracks. Both versions of "Can You Feel the Love Tonight," both in the movie and Elton John's reprise of it, fantastic. Another example of the movie albums that I enjoy, Apollo 13. If you have not seen Apollo 13, you seriously need to. It is just a wonderful, wonderful movie about the events that have transpired. And the album is just wonderful music. Every time I listen to the track that is, of course, if it's a movie soundtrack, so the tracks are going to be titled after the scenes in the movie. So the the track that's labeled All Systems Go, the launch, every time I listen to that track, I immediately start thinking about our space exploration and how one of these days I would love to be able to go up. I'll never be able to make it as an astronaut because of my physical disabilities, but if space tourism ever becomes affordable, and by affordable I mean down to the price of a jetliner ticket, then, hey, it could happen. How I got into the music, watch the movie. Same goes for The Lion King and Back to the Future. I especially love the opening sequence, the opening musical score for Back to the Future 2, especially towards the end, just before the time machine appears in 2015. For a while, I even had that as my ringtone. There are some pieces that I've gotten into recently. Some friends of mine have got me into some music. This scene is from a video on YouTube. If you search for Erutan, Erutan, the track is entitled Winter Moon or Beneath the Winter Moon. I can't remember which one. It's just a beautiful track about this. Supposedly, from what I was told, it was Japanese. It was based on Japanese folklore about this woman, this snow woman, who basically led people to their death. But it's sung beautifully. I love it. Listening to people like her gives me the inspiration to continue to want to improve my own singing. Same with Peter Holland's Loch Lomond. If you ever heard, perhaps in movies, the verse, "You take the high road and I'll take the low road and I'll be in Scotland before you," that comes from this. It's just, and the way that he does it is with vocal harmonies. Out of all the kinds of music that I enjoy, vocal harmonies are my favorite. I just love vocal. There's nothing more soothing than a human voice, in my opinion. But no, so this is the kind of music that I enjoy. If anybody has anything along these lines of what you've seen here that you'd like to recommend to me, please do. I have Amazon Prime Music, I've got Spotify, I've got Google Play Music, I've got YouTube Red. So keep that in mind. If you want to recommend something to me, try to keep it within one of those mediums so that if I wanted to, I could add it to my playlists or library. That's pretty much it. And this video's probably drone on forever and you're probably asleep, and I do apologize for that. Thank you for watching. Comments are welcome and have a nice day.